Substance use prevention, lesson 4, causes of substance use. And this is part 2 of our causes of substance use topic. Today we're going to be focusing on genetics, environment, and mental health as causes of substance use disorder. And here's just a little bit about me. My name is Amanda. I'm a health education and health promotion student at Arizona State University. You can interact with me through the comments underneath the lecture video, as well as on the social media pages, Substance Abuse Prevention 123. You'll see the page names later on in the lecture. And feel free to comment and interact with me. I'm super friendly and I'd love to hear from you guys. So the topic of our lecture today is causes of substance use disorder. As you can see here, we are looking at the genetic factors, environmental factors, and mental health factors that cause substance use disorder. This is lecture 4 of a 12 lecture series on substance use disorder prevention. And in this lecture, you're going to see how these factors that we just listed here can lead to substance use and the development of substance use disorder. Next, we have our student learning objectives. We have 4 of them for this lecture. Number 1 is participants will be able to define one genetic, environmental, and mental health factor that may contribute to the causation of substance use disorder in writing with 100% accuracy. Student learning objective number 2 is participants will be able to define one genetic factor that is linked to substance use disorder in writing with 100% accuracy. Number 3 is participants will be able to define 2 environmental factors that cause substance use disorder in writing with 100% accuracy. And finally, our last student learning objective, number 4, is participants will be able to identify one mental health factor that may enhance the likeliness of substance use disorder with 100% accuracy. Keep an eye out for those because you'll see them. They'll look familiar to you when we're reviewing our written assignments later on in the lecture. Lesson 4 summary. So this is just a little outline of what we're going to be covering and in what order during Lesson 4's lecture today. So first we're going to talk about genetic factors. We'll have a reflection and a written assignment. Then we'll move on to the environmental factors. Similarly, we're going to have a reflection and a written assignment for those. Then we will finish off with mental health factors. Same thing, reflection and written assignment. And then we'll close out by reviewing the materials, just a brief little review. And then we will also review our student learning objectives and we'll go over those written assignments that were assigned during the lecture. And then lastly, like the previous lectures, we are going to have an independent practice assignment, and that's optional. So let's take a moment to think about this a little bit before we dive right into the lecture. What I want you to do today is to get out a pen and a paper and write down what you know about environmental factors that cause substance use. Do a little bit of brainstorming here. If you can't think of any, just take a moment and ponder on it. If you can't think of any, make some guesses. Just guess about different things that might have to do with environmental factors. So things that surround you in your environment and how those things might contribute to substance use disorder. Now, you can pause the lecture for a moment to write that down, take, 2, 3, maybe 4 minutes and just make a little list, do some brainstorming, and then once you finish up your list, unpause the lecture video and we will move on down the road here with our lecture. Welcome back from your brainstorming session. Just set your papers aside. We're going to be pulling them out and looking at them a little bit later during the lecture. But for now, we are going to talk about genetic factors. So you might be wondering, what are genetic factors? What does the word genetic mean? So these genetic factors are made up of your genes. Your genes they're essentially the information that's coded in your DNA. These genetic factors in your DNA, they direct cellular function. So that means they tell the cells in your body what to do, how to do it, when to do it. They really control what's going on at a cellular level in your body. And after all, your body is made up of just tons and tons and tons of cells. So it really affects a lot of things that happen in your body. Now, studies indicate substance use disorder may be a heritable trait. So these studies found that once a person starts using drugs, their genetic makeup may actually speed up or delay the progression of the disease. So this means that based off of what your genes tell your cells to do, what the genes are made out of, essentially, what is going on with your genes, what they're telling your body, that might cause somebody who has started using drugs to progress into substance use disorder really fast. Or on the other end, it might slow down the progression of the disease, and that person who has a slower progression, they're less likely to develop substance use disorder because of what their genes are saying. So here we see a study example. So this is just a study that has been done, and this kind of shows us, this is an example of how these genetic factors play into the development of substance use disorder. So we're going to the first study we're going to be looking at is the marijuana use study that says that low levels of a gene on chromosome 8 is associated with cannabis use disorder. This gene right here is CHRNA2. I don't expect you to memorize that, but if you're curious, that's the name of the disease. So what this study has proven is that when a person has low levels of this gene located on chromosome 8, this correlates with a more prevalent occurrence of substance use disorder in people. Now, cannabis abuse disorder, we haven't really seen that term before. That just is specific to marijuana use. So it's the same thing essentially as substance use disorder, but it's specifically looking at people who use marijuana rather than all the other substances that we've talked about already, like opioids or stimulants or alcohol or nicotine, anything like that. So this study just focused on marijuana users, and that's this gene right here was related to specifically marijuana use, cannabis use disorder. Now, this study also showed that it's estimated that 30% of marijuana users develop cannabis abuse disorder. So 30% of people who ever use marijuana will develop cannabis abuse disorder. Now we're going to take a look at a second example of a study that's been done regarding genetic factors. This study has to do with gene location. So when this study was being performed, there were over 100 scientists collecting information on smoking and alcohol use behaviors. So these scientists, they came from all over the world, international scientists. They looked at a database that they compiled information on smoking and alcohol use behaviors, and they just studied tons and tons of different aspects and qualities that these people had. So that includes the age that the use began. That would be when they started either drinking or smoking. That could be, or then the age of cessation. Cessation is another word for quitting or stopping. So this is the age if they did quit smoking or drinking alcohol, what age it was that they stopped. The next thing they looked at, or another thing they looked at, was the number of cigarettes or the number of drinks per week. So that's how much and how many drinks and cigarettes they're smoking. Another quality was heart rate. Another quality was cholesterol, and the list goes on and on. They looked at tons and tons of different factors, and what they learned by analyzing these factors and then looking at the genes associated with these people, they actually found 400 different locations in the genome that influence the use of alcohol and smoking. So based on your genes, and you may know from your science classes that you've taken in school, or maybe you're just curious and you learn this outside of school, that that we have 46 chromosomes as humans. We have 23 pairs. They come in pairs of two is a pair, and we have 46 chromosomes. So on those 46 chromosomes, there's over 400 different locations that they've seen a connection with alcohol use or smoking. So as studies go on, hopefully we'll be able to learn more about how these genes in these specific locations affect the way that people use alcohol and they smoke. And you can see here that both of these studies came from the National Institute of Health. The next thing that we are going to look at in regards to genetic factors of substance use disorder is epigenetics. Amanda, what is epigenetics? Well, epigenetics is the study of the changes in the gene activity and expression. So these are factors that affect the way that a gene is expressed or what the gene does. The term epi is a prefix and it means above or in addition to. So I like to think of your genes operating on one level, and then epigenetics are the factors that work, oh, you can't see my green, that work above it to influence the way that it expresses or the way that it makes the cells act. Now, these factors are environmental. So what this is saying is that the genes are influenced by the environment, and that actually changes at some point the activity or the expression of the cell. So it changes the way the cells act, and these can be inherited. So what's interesting is that if something happens to the parent and they have some type of environmental factor that affects them, it changes the way the cells act. That epigenetic factor, that change, can be passed down to the child. And that now their gene is expressed the same way or similarly, or their gene expression has changed. And so on and so forth, that can be passed down as well. So epigenetics is like the study of it is important because it studies the way that the genes can be changed and how those changes can be inherited. Okay, so let's just take a moment to reflect on all the information that we just learned. Is any of this information surprising to you? If so, what was the most surprising? If it wasn't surprising, why wasn't it surprising? Did you already know it, or did you kind of suspect that that was the case? Did it make sense to you? I'd love you to think back about the studies that we looked at, the marijuana use study and the gene location study. Which study did you find most interesting? Also, can you think of other examples or specific examples of epigenetics in relation to substance use disorder? Please feel free to comment your answers beneath the video and also discuss your answers with other participants. Comment on other participants' answers. I'd love to see what you guys have to say about this topic. And now we see our first written assignment. I would like you to define one genetic factor that is linked to substance use disorder in the comment section below the lecture video. Keep in mind you can also post your answers to the Instagram or Facebook pages as well. Here are the Instagram and Facebook pages. Our Instagram is Substance Abuse Prevention 123, and the same thing, that's no spaces in there. And then for Facebook, it's the same thing but with spaces, Substance Abuse Prevention 123. Let's move on to our next section, which is environmental factors. The environment that surrounds a person can contribute to substance use disorder. These factors may increase the likelihood of initial drug use. One environmental factor is exposure to drug use. So here we see that if someone is exposed to drug use often, if other people are using drugs around them, whether it be family, friends, peers, neighbors, if they just see other people using drugs often, that can influence them to try drugs for the first time or to normalize this idea that drug use is acceptable. So it influences them and it makes them more likely to try or use drugs more than if they were never exposed to drug use. Our next factor is family life. We have familial factors here. So family beliefs and attitudes are something that influence a person's likelihood of developing substance use disorder. If an individual has family who they have beliefs that substance use and substance abuse is very bad, unacceptable, they don't condone that type of behavior at all, then the individual is less likely to ever try substances or repeatedly try them. If the individual's family believes that substance use is okay at times or a normal practice and is acceptable, then the individual is much more likely to try drugs in the first place and continue to use them after their initially trying them for the first time. The next factor is family conflicts as well. If an example of this is families who frequently have arguments that could be arguments or conflicts, verbal or physical, between parents, between parent and child, between other family members as well, extended family members, families with conflicts and who have a lot of arguments, abuse, etc. Those families, individuals that belong to families like that are significantly more likely to try drugs and to continue to use drugs as well. Our next factor here under family is absent or neglectful parenting. So when parents are not involved in their child's lives, and by absent, they could be living in the same home. Well, no, that would be really more neglectful. Absent parents would be parents who have abandoned their children, are not present in their life to some degree. And then neglectful parenting would be parents who are present in the home but they don't take a lot of time, pay attention to their children, give the children the care and affection that is required, or they don't pay any attention to their children, that would be absent or neglectful parenting. Next, we'll look at peer group. So this is an individual's group of friends, or the people they surround them with that their own age. So we have a major factor, friends who use drugs. We kind of saw this over here with exposure to drugs, to drug use. Friends who use drugs, if you have a ton of friends who use drugs, it makes the individual more likely to try drugs as well. The next item we have under peer group is the friend's attitudes and belief towards drugs. That is similar to this family beliefs and attitudes that we see over here. When an individual's peer group has an attitude of acceptance or belief that using substances and trying drugs is acceptable, the individual is more likely to adopt that idea as well, and then use drugs as well. And then a community factor is common drug use in the community. This also kind of is similar to this exposure to drug use. The more prevalent substance use is in a community, the more likely the individual who lives there is to try drugs. Okay, let's take a moment and let's reflect on everything that we've just looked at here. Have you ever experienced any of these factors? Or do you know anybody who lives in an environment with these factors? Can you think of any other examples other than the ones that I kind of gave during the lecture that relate to these factors? Feel free to comment your answers underneath the lecture video and discuss with other participants. Now, if you don't feel comfortable answering questions about your own experiences with these factors, you don't have to comment them under the videos. You can also direct message me on one of the social media pages, or you can list examples, or make up examples if you don't feel comfortable sharing about your personal life on the internet. And this brings us to our second written assignment. I would like you to define 2 environmental factors that can cause substance use disorder in the comment section below the lecture video. You can always post these answers to the Instagram or Facebook pages as well. And I have the addresses listed again here on this page as well, just in case you haven't subscribed to them yet, or if you forgot. They are right here. Here's the Instagram, and here is the Facebook again. All right, let's move on to our third factor that we're going to be looking at, mental health factors. So there is a strong association between substance use and mental illness. In 2017, 8.5 million people in the United States suffered from co-occurring disorders of substance use disorder and at least one other mental health disorder. Now, that means that 8.5 million people had substance use disorder and they had a different mental health disorder. So that could be, there's a variety of mental health disorders that could be co-occurring with substance use disorder. For example, ADHD, PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, their panic or anxiety disorders, depression, the list goes on. What's interesting about this fact, this statistic that I have listed here, is we see 8.5 million people is the number that was suffering from co-occurring disorders. Now, I don't know if you remember, but in lesson 2, we saw that 19.5 million people suffered from substance use disorder in the United States in 2017. So we're looking at almost half, not exactly half, but almost half of the people who suffered from substance use disorder also suffered from one other mental health disorder. So that's a pretty strong, pretty large portion of people to be suffering from two disorders. Mental illness can precede substance use disorder. And by that, I mean that mental illness can be present before the development of the substance use disorder. In some cases, the person suffering from the mental illness may be attempting to self-medicate using the drugs as a coping mechanism for their mental health disorder. And then from that drug use, substance use can develop, or substance use disorder can develop. So the person may have a certain mental health disorder, and they will be self-medicating, which means they're using drugs to try to cope with the symptoms of their mental health disorder, trying to either make the symptoms go away or trying to make them lessen in some capacity or something like that. And then because of their repeated substance use, the substance use disorder can develop. Also, mental illness can develop after substance use disorder. So that would mean that the substance use begins first, and then after that, because of the substance use and the effect that it has on the individual's brain, the mental health disorder may develop afterwards as a kind of symptom almost, or of the substance use disorder. So regardless of whether it starts first or second, the substance use disorder can trigger or worsen the co-occurring mental health disorder, meaning, and by trigger we mean that that would be in the case that substance use disorder develops first, and then it triggers or causes the mental health disorder, or by worsen over here, we see that the mental health disorder may occur at first, and then the substance use actually will make the mental health disorder worse. The individual thinks that they're self-medicating and they're doing that to alleviate their disorder, but it actually ends up making their symptoms of their mental health disorder worse. Trauma is another mental health factor. There is a link between sexual abuse and substance use disorder, and that link is especially strong if the abuse occurs during the formative years or childhood. So if an individual experiences sexual abuse, especially during their formative years, that can cause substance use disorder or increase the likelihood of developing substance use disorder. Let's just take a moment and pause and reflect on all that information that we just looked at. Did any of that information surprise you? What about the statistics that we saw in this section? We saw that 8.5 million people in the United States suffer from co-occurring disorders. Does that number seem low? Does it seem high? Can you see the connection between substance use disorder and mental health disorder? If you can't, why not? If you can, maybe talk about that in the comment section. How does thinking about substance use and mental illness make you feel? Comment that underneath the video, discuss with other participants, and feel free to comment on other people's comments as well. And next we have our final written assignment. I would like you to identify one mental health factor that may enhance the likeliness of substance use disorder in the comment section below the video. Just the same as the other written assignments, you can comment them on the Facebook and Instagram posts. And here we have our addresses again as well. Let's just take a moment to briefly review what we learned. This isn't everything that was covered, but this kind of just is a very generalized brief review of lecture number 4. So first, a person's genes and inherited traits can contribute to the development of substance use disorder. Next, a person's environment can contribute to the development of substance use disorder. This includes family, friends, and community. And then lastly, mental illness is linked to substance use disorder as well. Here we have a list of all of the written assignments. If you did not pause the video as we were going through and answer and complete the assignments, you can always do that after the lecture. Either way is fine. Number 1 is to define one genetic factor that is linked to substance use disorder. Number 2 is to define 2 environmental factors that can cause substance use disorder. And number 3 is to identify one mental health factor that may enhance the likelihood of substance use disorder. Remember that you can comment these beneath the lecture video on the Instagram or Facebook pages, or you can always direct message them to me on the Instagram or Facebook pages as well. Here are the resources that I used to create this lecture. If you're curious or want to learn any more about any of these topics, you can start by exploring these resource pages. And we will wrap up our lecture number 4 video with the independent practice assignment. And remember that this is optional. I would like you to create a picture or a document that lists and depicts one genetic, one environmental, and one mental health factor that may cause substance use disorder. Like all the independent practice assignments, you can use your creativity to do the assignment and to kind of interpret the directions. So if you want to write them out and draw pictures, if you just use your creativity to create that picture or document as you want. You can submit the assignment by posting it to social media and tagging the Instagram or Facebook pages, posting it on the Instagram or Facebook pages, or the Facebook page, or you can direct message it to me as well. This concludes our lecture number 4 on the genetic, environmental, and mental health factors that cause substance use disorder. Thanks for watching the lecture video. I hope you got a lot out of it, and I'll see you in lecture number 5, where we will be discussing the symptoms of substance use disorder.